All right, and our next speaker will be talking about the REDMoon model, radiation environment and dose rates on the lunar surface and subsurface.
So my name is Mikhail, and I'm going to present you the model we have developed to assess the radiation environment and associated dose rates. Um, so the lunar surface is not protected from energetic space particles like Earth with its magnetic field and atmosphere, and so space radiation particles, they propagate inside the soil and produce cascades of secondary particles which increase the exposure rates of future astronauts on the lunar surface and beneath it. In our model, we consider the moon as a spherical body with soil composition and density defined in Apollo 17 mission at the moment. The isotropic irradiation of the interplanetary radiation is in our model is reproduced with a unidirectional particle flux, which creates on the lunar surface exactly the same angular distribution of particles as in the case of the isotropic particle source. And but our approach has an advantage that like uh, we distinguish between we divide all particles into the angular ranges at which they hit the lunar surface, and in this way we would later account for the influence of lunar topology on the radiation environment and dose rates. We use the response function approach, so we calculate the induced radiation environment per one incoming space radiation particles depending on the angle of incoming and its energy, and then we make a convolution of the response function with the incoming particle spectra, and we get the radiation environment, so we don't need to run the Monte Carlo simulation each time. So on this figure you can see the histogram of the particle spectra, which is induced with the galactic cosmic rays during solar maximum and solar minimum in the lunar soil. So you can see that the GCR protons and alpha particles, their flux decrease inside the lunar surface, while the secondary neutron, gamma ray, and secondary leptons, their flux is increasing, and the maximum is approximately at 50 centimeters, but like exact position, it depends on the energy of secondary particles. With our model, we also so this is the average flux, but with our model, we can also get the angular dependence of particles at certain depths. So we have verified the results of our model with previous measurements and previous calculation, and we found that like relatively good agreement, but some like mismatch it might be because of the difference in the soil composition and yeah, and the model of physical processes that we use. So the main aim of the model is to assess radiation dose rates, and here in these plots you can see the dependence of the effective dose rate inside the moon as a function of depth beneath the surface. The blue is with the blue color here on the top two panels, we show the total effective dose, and the rest colors, they show contribution of different species of particles. So red for the primary GCR particles and violet for neutrons. These two types of particles, they contribute mostly to the effective dose. And on two panels below, you can see the relative contribution to the total effective dose, and you can see so that on the surface, uh, approximately 60% of the radiation dose is due to primary particles, and these are mainly the heavy particles, HCE, while inside the moon, beneath the lunar surface, secondary neutron radiation, it dominates in the effective dose. And an interesting thing here is that while the effective dose varies up to, I don't know, 40% depending on the solar cycle, the relative contribution of different species to the net dose, it varies only within 3%.
2 minutes.
Yep. What can be interesting, what we get from our model, we get contribution of particles with different energy to the effective dose. And this information, it can be used to design, for example, radiation dosimeters. So for example, to measure on this plot here, you can see that to measure 80, 90% of neutron dose on the lunar surface, you need to measure neutrons from hundreds of keV up to 100 MeV. We used our model we analyzed previous two solar cycle and created an example of mission schedule, which is needed for persistent presence of human on the moon. Each color here denotes a certain crew, and okay, and this figure, it somehow summarizes the previous one. So depending on the regulation of the exposure, you can calculate the required number of crews during these 20 years, and you can estimate the number of flights. And yeah, so if we go a little bit more, we can go a little bit more into details and assess the number of crews we need at the moment, like to be in a stack. And so I'm running out of time. So the next steps in the model development would be accounting for topography map of the moon, to assess the radiation dose in each point, then to analyze the SCP events because they are sporadic, and for the future we can estimate only the GCR precisely. We plan to consider different extra shielding materials, and we would start a web interface with all these dependencies I've shown you. So they would be available simply.
All right, thank you, Mikkel. There are a couple of questions that came through. So referring to your model setup chart, you modeled the radiation as a point source versus a planar heliosphere, almost infinite large radio source. Is that correct? And can you speak to your rationale for this assumption?
So the main advantage of the planar source is that we use a circle source, and then we split it into the ring, and each ring, it responds for particles that come at a certain angle on the lunar surface. And the lunar topology, for example, when you stay inside a crater on the lunar surface, you would not get contribution of particles which come from like 90 degrees So you can exclude them from when you assess the radiation dose and the radiation environment. The point source is also okay, but the the inset here, it shows you the angular distribution of particles which hit the lunar surface for the unidirectional, our case, cosine point near the lunar surface, the blue, and purely isotropic source, which is black, and they all coincide, so they're like identical. But from the practical point of view, the ring sources are better.
All right, thank you. And one more, have you published your output data tables on any public servers?
So this part with the model description, it is available in JGR Planets, and the particle spectra, you can find a link there for the Zanedo. Well, just you will find a reference to the data set in this publication. And this part with radiation dose estimates and schedule, it would be available soon. We are submitting publication now.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you very much. This was a great talk.